The Spinoff Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
The most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spinoff or wherever you get your podcasts.
Should we go? Let's go.
No, just go. Okay, you guys start. You guys start. I'll go on mute.
No more hiding my... I'm a bit wheezy. Maybe I need to go and have a puff on my nailer. Just chat for a sec.
Yes, have a puff.
That's the good shit. No mai haere mai, kia gone by lunchtime. Ko Toby Manhire toku ingoa, kia ora tātou, ka nui te mihi, ki ngā tama kino o Brexit. Kia ora Annabelle, kia ora Ben, ki te pehe kura?
Kei te pai ahau e ora tonu ana I taku kāhui rāhui. Kua tino hoha ki te noho taratahi. I'm still surviving in my bubble, but pretty over the lockdown, and I mean, it's an extraordinary amount of time to spend with one's own children, and I'm just sort of formulating in my mind some sort of contemporary treaty claim that I could potentially take about it.
Kia ora Ben, kei te pehe koe?
Kia ora. I forgot that it was Te Wiki o Te Reo. So I'm currently now furiously Googling whakatoki that we can sprinkle liberally throughout.
Oh, you did some whakatoki one time, didn't you? That was good last year.
I'm just trying to. There's a really good list on. I think it's like in the National Library website. So anyway, you guys just go ahead.
Kia ora te ai here. Thank you for staying up late to record us tonight. Kei te pehe koe?
Kei te ora, kia ora Toby.
Kei te pai. This, ladies and gentlemen, is another late night level 4 lockdown gone by lunchtime. We're coming to you tonight, direct from the truth sauna in our pod bunker, carved into the Wānaka hills. Is it true, Annabelle Lee Mather, that Wānaka is a dialect pronunciation of Wānanga? Is that true?
My understanding is that, yes, it's Wānaka, which is the Ngaitahu pronunciation for Wānanga, and Ngaitahu, a lot of our NGs are pronounced as Ks.
So like Wānaka is like the place of learning kind of thing?
Yes, could be a place where they had a wānanga, a sort of educational situation, or a house of learning, or a meeting, or could mean a number of things. To be honest, you've snapped me out. I don't actually know the whakapapa of the name Wānaka, but I know what Wānaka is.
I just found that out. I found that out because I looked it up on Te Wikipedia o Te Reo Māori. Ben, kei te pehe koe?
Look, just like every lockdown, I haven't cracked open my Māori Made Easy by Scotty Morrison. It's like, it's on my table next to me, and I don't need to be shamed like this. This is a journey that we're all taking together as a nation, and the people that we should really be focusing on here are the couple that went down to Wānaka to learn a harsh lesson about lockdown justice.
Well, I look forward to the pair and you getting together and releasing a mini album entirely in Te Reo Māori. I imagine everyone is on the edges of their seat, looking forward to us talking about the situation of the National Party, but we're not going to do that immediately, at least, because for the time being, Gone by Lunchtime is the formal, official opposition in New Zealand, the absence of anything else, and we need to attend to the serious issues. Me taipari whakarewa waka ngā whakaaro. Let's discuss the issues, Annabelle Lee Mather. There was a alert level decision made in principle, I think it was, on Monday, which is to say that in principle, Auckland region will move down to alert level 3 midnight Tuesday next week. Oh, I should say, we're recording on Wednesday night, just before 9 p.m, September the 15th. So next Tuesday, the idea is it'll move to level 3. And that was, it was an interesting call. We were told that had been the advice from the Ministry of Health, but it struck me that it was also an important call in terms of just the mood, right? Like people you can feel it somehow, even as you go on your mandated walk, even as you stare into the abyss of the internet, that people, there's a little bit of fraying going on. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong. It's been a long, hard lockdown, and it's our third hard lockdown in Auckland?
5th.
And is it our 5th?
If you count the little short one, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So anything that can get us out of level 4 and into level 3 and further down quickly has got to be a good thing, particularly for me. So I need to escape my children.
Ben, do you reckon there was any shift in tone? I mean, I was struck listening to the Prime Minister on Monday morning, and it's not like when I kind of revisit it, it's not as though necessarily there was anything that was substantively different. It's just that there was a shift in tone to, people, we can't go through this we don't want people to go through this lockdown again. I think her language was, we need to get vaccination up. There seemed to be a kind of acknowledgement that people have had enough.
Yeah, and it was, I mean, look, remember before Delta became the predominant variant and the issue that we had to grapple with once it started, particularly once it got out into the community. But prior to that, the government really had been sort of running this line that, we likely would not have to go into level 4 ever again, that our contact tracing, that MIQ would be sufficient to allow us to sort of dampen down outbreaks at level 3 like we did earlier this year, and not the sort of really harsh lockdown of level 4, which, it's a bit trite to say, but some of the harshest lockdown conditions in the world. Delta obviously changes that. It's got different characteristics, the main one of which is that it's much easier to catch it and it spreads much faster. And so I was on a ZB panel earlier today, and, they were saying, this is a political decision that, to foreshadow that we're going into alert level 3. All of these are political decisions. I think that's something that's been missing throughout this whole sort of epidemic is that, people say, we're following the science. Well, look, science can give you sort of models of how spread happens, but, any decision about locking down, stopping the economy, freeing things back up, it's all political. And, the government is probably right that, this is the advice that was tendered by the Ministry of Health. Advice to ministers is a bit of an iterative process. It's not as if, advice is tendered in a vacuum, to a minister who is otherwise completely removed from everything and then circles yes or no. This is the sort of thing that's, it's part of a dialogue. That said, we can still be pretty optimistic that we can get it down to a certain sort of rate as long as people abide by the rules, as to the extent that they have been in the next week. But look, the government's messaging has always been that lockdowns are temporary. The only difference is that prior to this, it's been that lockdowns are temporary, we'll be vaccinated at some point, and there hasn't been a lot of action towards that, whereas right now, there is a real momentum towards it.
There is, Annabelle, I mean, as one of New Zealand's leading epidemiologists, that the numbers to look at aren't just that top line of new cases, but infectious in the community number, and also the how long people have been with how the link to other cases, the epidemiological link, and it's actually looking all right, right? Like, I mean, obviously it's frightening when people are rolling up to hospital and there's no known link at that point, but that seems so far to have been closed up pretty well. By the way, how about the people at Middlemore just absolutely nailing it? The kind of the most important institution in the country at the moment is probably Middlemore Hospital. Maybe the Beehive has some importance, but it's just incredible the work that everyone there is doing. The doctors, nurses, all the other staffers at Middlemore. Man. Anyway, I'm not sure what my question was, but you can answer any one of those questions, Annabelle.
I agree. I think, it's the people at Middlemore have been doing a phenomenal job, and there was a bit of a pile-on with them last week. But, I mean, wherever there's humans, there's going to be human error, and it seems to me they did a really good job of getting control of a situation that wasn't of their own creation. In terms of the unlinked cases, it's exciting to see those numbers coming right down. And it was a strange week media-wise, because earlier in the week, the narrative that was coming through is, we can't beat Delta, we're losing the fight, we've run out of runway, we're going to have to put our hands up and admit defeat. But the numbers that have come through over the last couple of days are pretty heartening, particularly for those of us in Tāmaki COVID.
Ben, it's the other sort of, I suppose, testing thing about the outbreak this time is that the levels of support in terms of, I suppose it's stimulus spending, and Grant Robertson put through on Thursday last week was it $41 billion Delta fund, which is pretty amazing. Didn't get as much attention as it probably warranted. But we've also got, under level 2 conditions, a lot of business and a lot of strife. We've got cafes closing. There are concerns about whether or not the wage subsidy is being put through with the same kind of alacrity as it was last time. There's not the same protections for tenants that were introduced last time, although the laws have changed a bit in the interim. Students aren't very happy about it. Those things are different this time too, aren't they?
Yeah, it almost seems like in the same way that we haven't had the same kind of messages about, hand washing and keeping 2 meters distant. And, there seems to be this idea that, we're well drilled and we know how to do all of this. And so even though it's, this will actually end up being a longer time in level 4 than the original hard lockdown, that actually it's just a matter of hunkering down and waiting. And we know, or we feel we know that the economy won't collapse in the way that we thought it would last year, that there won't be mass unemployment, there won't be massive social upheaval, which is taking a little bit for granted in the sense that, a lot of businesses, particularly because Delta level 2 is different from normal level 2 and can be expected to probably hang around for quite a bit longer, that will still have flow-on effects for a lot of hospitality businesses, probably pretty, could be pretty catastrophic for, the South Island, where a lot of, tourism was based, where they, really have been kind of hanging on by a thread and propped up by sort of Auckland holidaymakers who go there legally.
Yeah, and just on a basic level, there are a lot of businesses whose business model is predicated on having more than 50 people on the premise at one time, right?
Yeah, that's right. We're pretty much the entire entertainment industry outside of sort of mime and interpretive dance. This will throw up a lot of challenges. So, the Hospitality Association were querying what they thought was some pretty imprecise language from the finance minister, saying that, they should still be eligible for wage subsidies. And, I think some of the questions, that have come up in this lockdown about, did we use our time between outbreaks productively, particularly the questions have been around in terms of, say, vaccines. Yeah. I think we might start to look at, other things like, say, masks, for instance. For quite a long time, it's been pretty well known that, cloth masks are sort of a kind of best of a bad situation, make do kind of solution. Better than nothing.
They look pretty though.
And we haven't, with Delta being much more transmissible, should there be more education about, masks with proper filters, even if they're surgical masks? Those supply issues seem to have been sorted out. What are we doing about getting vulnerable communities, poorer communities where there's overcrowding, good masks rather than just, waiting for them to get the take a cue and put a bandana on? We see it again. There's this. The funny competition about naming the funny bus with the funny name.
We're not talking about that. It's banned. That conversation is banned on this podcast.
But it is pretty grim that, the funny name conversation is the first time that we actually hear about making proactive steps to go to remote communities rather than having them come to, a testing location. And I'm thinking about, rural areas in particular. There are a lot of people in New Zealand who, they're not vaccine hesitant in the sense of thinking that there's a global plot or a Bill Gates microchip. They're just a long way away. Their experiences with the government are very different from the head of Briscoe's, whose experience with government is, organising lunch with ministers or filling out a form for MSD to, claim $150,000 in wage subsidies. They don't have the same level.
Which was paid back, ladies and gentlemen, lawyers.
Yeah, but they don't have the same level of they don't have the same background of having good experiences with the state. And you can't expect that, flyers and Facebook ads will be enough to get them to come along and get the jab. And the fact that this has been now reduced to, Bussy McBusface or whatever the fuck, is actually a little bit disappointing and again just speaks to a bit of a lack of planning.
The thing too is that it's not just people living in remote communities that are struggling to go and get vaccinated. After we had John Whanga on the hui, he's the Deputy Director General of Health for Māori, we were contacted by a community leader from Otara who was saying that, for people out there, one of the problems is, you've got solo parent families with kids and no car and no petrol, and so even getting to a vaccination centre with your kids in tow can be a real challenge and frankly out of the reach of some whānau who are struggling, to get kai on the table when they're having to spend hours on end talking, trying to get through to someone at once. In terms of the support for small businesses, it's interesting because this week Rawani Pereira has spoken to a couple of Māori businesses in the hospitality industry, and while one of them is doing it quite tough, in terms of lessons learned from the first lockdown, one of them has really changed their business model. So it's quite interesting how some are coping really well during lockdown, and others are really struggling. And in terms of the rest of the, small businesses in the country and whether or not they'll be able to access help in level 2, you've got to feel for them because they've lost their international tourism market. Now they've lost the Australian bubble, although you'd have to question whether economically it was worth having an Australian bubble in the first place, given that we've now spent, 5 weeks in lockdown, and now they're losing their Auckland clientele, all bar 2. So you would hope that they are able to get some support.
I just got that gag very late, but yeah, it's very good.
Better late than never, Topes.
Yep. You can hear the chime of the bell. I've been getting a lot of names wrong today as well. I feel as though everything is falling apart for me in week 5, and I'm soon going to be one of those kind of lovely, charming, but random elderly men who just sort of darts out words without invitation.
Kua pakaru te peanutsy.
Exactly that.
Means you're a bit fuddled. Your brain's busted.
Speaking of that, Winston Peters popped up again.
Oh, did you see
over lockdown?
He's posting back on Twitter.
He's like the rest of us. He's just spent lockdown online, and he's and while most of us were devoted to the sort of 48-hour manhunt, the scavenger hunt for clues as to the identity of the equestrian couple. Peters has been on the trail of a super fund investment, which is the company that coincidentally got the government contract for saliva swab testing. And he's lodged a complaint with the Auditor General saying that, maybe querying whether a fair process was followed in that tender. So, look, that's an inspiration to everybody, keeping active in retirement.
Well, he might be onto something too, the story that Dileepa Fonseca wrote for the Sunday Star Times on Sunday was pretty compelling about the dude who runs the company, the name of which I can't recall, that has that government contract versus the woman that they call I think they call her the saliva queen or the spit queen, who's the New Zealand academic working in the States that he was denouncing for having the temerity to say things from time to time.
Having the temerity to point out that it was a problem that they hadn't done any saliva tests yet.
Yeah.
After months of having the government contract. So, look, it just shows, when the team of 5 million gets together, we will find everyone culpable of something. But
you say, by the way, Ben, that Winston Peters wasn't on the equestrian track, but in fact, he posted on his Twitter a couple of days ago a picture of New Zealand's best dog, Bo, Winston Peters' dog, having a little kiss with one of Winston's horses on his farm up in the north.
Well, the thing is the Wānaka couple, the boyfriend is a stud master. He also deals in horses, and so he will have been a beneficiary of Winston Peters' tenure as racing minister at some point with his fine tall horses.
No, isn't he mostly show jumping?
Yeah, he's a show jumping champion. But the thing is that I would respect him so much more if he'd tried to ride his horse to Wānaka. I'd be totally on board with that. He'd be like
jumped the
Braveheart.
police barricade.
Yeah, how cool would that be? But no. And then apparently tested negative for COVID, but positive for entitleitis.
You're listening to Gone by Lunchtime. We'll be back in just a moment. Ka hoki mai, mātou akua nei.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spinoff. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spinoff member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spinoff. You can help us keep all of The Spinoff's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Let's talk about the National Party. They're probably on various clusters or sub-clusters of the National Party caucus meeting this very moment, saying things like "He ika hai kupenga." Annabelle, do you think that's likely?
I think that there is probably a large number of National Party members who consider Judith to be a ika hai kupenga, which is a fish that rips through the net. And Judith herself probably considers herself he taniwhahi kuroa, which is a very influential leader. And I guess over the next couple of weeks we'll see who's right and who's wrong.
So about a couple of months ago, Janet Wilson was invited to appear on The Fold, which is another podcast produced by The Spinoff. Now you're thinking there aren't any other podcasts produced by The Spinoff. The only podcast produced by The Spinoff is Gone By Lunchtime. How could there be any other podcast? Why would there need to be any other podcast?
Great question.
The Fold is a podcast about the media, and it's a good podcast. You should like and subscribe. And Duncan Grieve, my colleague and boss, invited Janet Wilson to come on his podcast after she wrote a column about Judith Collins' leadership. Now, Janet Wilson was the head of press, the chief press secretary for Todd Muller, and then inherited Judith Collins, or Judith Collins inherited her. I'm not sure which one. And she wrote a column for Stuff about that experience, which was, well, it was kind of cutting. It wasn't brutal, but it was cutting. And anyway, Janet Wilson said no to Duncan. But then on Saturday, she changed her mind and said that she would like to talk to Duncan. That was after Judith Collins had called Susie Wiles a big fat hypocrite. She actually called her that twice. So it's clear that it wasn't a slip of the tongue. And Janet said she'd changed her mind. She wanted to talk after all. That podcast was released yesterday. And if you are one of the very few people in Aotearoa who hasn't listened to it already, here's a taste. Janet Wilson, who was head of press for Collins, begins by praising the national leader for lending a sense of calm in her first few weeks as leader. But then something changes.
And then Judith decided to start doing things on her own. Things like going into churches and praying, which was never on anyone's schedule or scheme. I had media ring me and say, "Did you know?" And I had to be really honest and say, no, I had no idea.
And this was Janet Wilson's response to Collins' remarks of late.
I think we're at a junction now where we're at a moment now where the harm that's been inflicted is pretty high. I mean, we haven't had a poll result yet, and I'm not sure when the next polls are out. And they may well have been pushed back because Auckland is in level 4. But there is no doubt in my mind that the electorate will look at this and see it for what it is, which is a cheap shot at someone. And empathy, whatever you think of Susie Wiles, is neither here nor there. Empathy will be always extended to Susie because of this attack by a political leader. Why aren't we talking about all the other things that New Zealanders are really, really worried about right now, like out-of-control housing prices, homelessness, the level of poverty within this country, and her ideas about how she intends to change that, and holding the government to account when, frankly, the government hasn't actually had a very good track record at all in any of those areas.
And finally, this is her diagnosis of the situation facing the National Party now. She said this.
So the article that Matthew Hooton wrote for Metro recently, talking about the fact that the party was on the brink of oblivion, is entirely correct. Entirely correct.
So Janet mentions that we might be waiting for the next poll, but in fact we've had a poll in the last few hours, Ben. It's not an ordinary poll. It's a poll by Curia, who and I don't know if they still are polling for the National Party, but certainly have done the internal polling for the National Party for a very long time. And that poll was commissioned by the Taxpayers Union, who are a right-wing free market think tank. But the poll was pretty crushing. It showed National down on 21.3%, and the ACT Party, whom Janet Wilson had warned were presented an existential risk to the National Party for 14.9%. I mean, that's basically 6 percentage points behind. That's the National Party a whisker above the Bill English result in, was it 2002?
Yep. Yeah, the historical low. And well below where they've polled in any of the mainstream opinion polls. Curia, which is David Farrer's company, they're a very credible firm. and like you said, have in the past been the National Party pollsters. It's been reported that National hasn't been polling since the election, and the conjecture is that that's because they don't want to see the results. Because if you do internal polling and you don't show your caucus what that is as the leader, then their suspicions arise about your performance. And there's also a suspicion that Collins doesn't believe she needs polling. She thinks she can trust her own instincts and her own advisors. One of the problems with this is Janet Wilson was sort of alluding to, is that, some of these advisors may not be the kind of may not be the political professionals that maybe previous National Party leaders have had. But by which I'm subtly alluding to the resurfacing of Cameron Slater, who was the source of that original Susie Wiles story. And, look, you can, personally, I think, I think there is a bit of hypocrisy there. Susie Wiles is a science communicator who tells us all to follow the rules, but stood idly by while her friend flouted level 4 restrictions. At the same time, that's good grist for the social media mill and for getting likes and faves by pointing it out, or for putting on your blog if you're Cameron Slater. It's not core business to spend 5 days on for the National Party leader. And that's what's happened in the last 5 days. And I wrote a column for Stuff, which will be out by now, sort of touching on this, which is that, when Dirty Politics came out in 2014, there's a little bit of discomfort around the idea that politicians, chief amongst them Judith Collins, would be using the whale oil blog as a way of getting out sort of stories or tidbits or attacks on people. I'm sort of so-so on that. It's not something I would have done or did do, but it's, you're allowed to use media sources, I suppose, and blogs kind of count as that. But the idea that Judith Collins would reciprocate by using the resources and the platform of the leader of the opposition to promote Cameron Slater's new blog is just crazy. That's insane. That's just such a sort of mix-up of priorities and a category error that I just don't know what's going on in that leadership there.
Annabelle, listened to the Janet Wilson interview. And I haven't spoken to her directly about any of this, I should say. I wasn't involved in the podcast. But one of the things that I think is telling is that you don't sense that this is a person out for vengeance, or at least I didn't. You don't sense that this is a person who is set upon destruction of a rival, or, it's not one of those kind of Shakespearean things that you see a lot in a lot of other politics. Like I remember when I lived and worked as a journalist in the UK, it wasn't that uncommon for former MPs, former staffers to speak out in very direct and dastardly fashion about their former colleagues. It doesn't happen that much in New Zealand, so that's one of the reasons why this was so striking. But in my view, Janet Wilson was not speaking. There was no sort of sense of pleasure or malice, but really just a genuine concern about what was happening to a party she's been a part of for a long time. She was a media trainer for John Key. And that's important, I think.
She kind of, without saying it, she kind of hinted at the new culture that's developed within the National Party, and that goes back to the stuff we talked about with the kind of born again Christian stronghold that's developed within National. But it was a fascinating interview, and interesting how she talked about not understanding how suddenly Judith veered completely off course in terms of what had been agreed to as the campaign strategy, and her what appeared to be her realisation since the Susie Wiles issue that perhaps, or alluding to the fact that maybe some of the odd decisions that Judith were making could whakapapa back to Cameron Slater's influence. Just in terms of the poll, I opened it up and I looked at it and kind of had a quick look at the numbers, and then I really looked at it hard and like relaxed my eyes and let them go out of focus. And the image that appeared to me was like an upside down Pac-Man eating a little blueberry, which was the National Party support, which I think is like a very apt image of what's happening. But it also made me wonder in terms of the growth of actors. I think my understanding is that there's a stronger older skew in terms of the National Party, and older people tend to be a lot more concerned about COVID in terms of its personal effect on their health, and probably less concerned about how we may pay back the debt that we're accruing to help get us through this period, whereas ACT voters are younger and as concerned about what might happen to them if they or a loved one got infected. But because they're young, they are more sort of cognizant about what the financial impact might be later on.
Isn't there something else on top of that, which is that in any time of crisis, which we are in now, unquestionably, you want somebody who, even if you don't totally agree with the view they take, who is consistent, who has a set of principles, and who you know is not going to wake up the next morning and just go the other way, seemingly on a whim. And then with the best will in the world, I don't know how you could imagine that Judith Collins is going to provide that consistency.
I think that's right. Over her career, she's had, I think, quite striking range in terms of the positions that she can adopt and successfully argue for, from sort of, very really quite liberal to sort of hardline conservative, and do it quite convincingly. But it's almost like one of those scenes in a movie where, the T-1000 in Terminator 2 starts sort of glitching and sort of shape-shifting on screen, where she can't kind of control it anymore. I think, as you pointed out in your incendiary piece over the weekend, she was very good on Q&A a week ago.
She was.
She was very statesmanlike in the immediate aftermath of the terrorism attack. And then this week she's just, today she's spent almost, basically an entire day engaged in sort of bitter feuds with, some pink-haired academic at Auckland University and her former chief press secretary. I mean, it's just, this is bananas. The largest city in the country is entering its longest period of lockdown, today marks the longest period. And she's just prosecuting personal grudges, and it's a ridiculous position for the second largest party in Parliament to be in.
For a Prime Minister in waiting, it's appalling, Annabelle. It sounds like the sort of protracted debate you might have on, let's say, a blog, rather than when you're auditioning for the role of the single most important person in the country.
The thing that's interesting about it too is she comes from a legal background. Not only was she a lawyer, she was like president of the Auckland Law Society, and was she deputy president of the National Law Society or the president of the National Law Society. So the fact that she's so reactionary to such petty issues just seems so bizarre. The thing is that sometimes she rises to the occasion and she can be really impressive when she does, but by and large she doesn't. She'll take the bait of whatever's going, and it's hard not to think that, this persona of her being a bit of being a mean girl is actually who she is. And, when we see the statesman-like presence, that's that's not who she genuinely is. It's just times when she manages to pull it together and do it. By and large, she enjoys the thrust and cut of like petty politics, but it does her no favours. And after the bloodbath of National since English left, I just don't think people feel safe to entrust them with running the country.
I think that because one of her strategies in order to enforce greater discipline, which we've talked about before, and keep her party on message, ironically, her trying to keep her party on message, has been this kind of purge in the caucus, slitting Nick Smith's throat, continuing the living nightmare that's been Todd Muller's life for the last year or so, and then sort of turning on those strong performers like Chris Bishop, really not to be too harsh on Bish, but just really humiliating him and just sort of parading him around like a sort of severed head trophy around Parliament the other week, and you just sort of wonder, is there any point to this, or is this just what she wakes up wanting to do in the morning?
The issue is like there doesn't seem to be any real contenders. There doesn't seem to be anyone in their ranks who could genuinely give Jacinda a run for her money. Maybe there will be in a couple of years when some of them have some more mileage on the clock. But I mean, if they roll her, who are they going to replace her with? Is Simon Bridges really a contender now to take on Jacinda at the next election?
That's it, Annabelle. That is, in a way, the more interesting question, given that, as Ben writes in his column, it's the end of the line. So the question really not. The question isn't if, is it? It's the question is who and when, really. Yeah. And those questions are, as far as I can tell, and I can't say I'm in touch with everyone who makes these decisions, but I've heard from a few of them. And the issue, the calculation had it clearly been, now is not the time. And that was even before the country was thrown into lockdown. Auckland remains in lockdown. To do it over Zoom, to do it at a time of crisis, to the risk of appearing self-indulgent, who's going to carry the can, look like a temporary leader. I mean, boy, it's kind of paradox levels, Ben.
Yeah, and absolutely, and it's not clear that any faction does have 50%. To roll her, we see Simon Bridges is, I think Claire Trevitt wrote in her column the other week, is the natural choice in that, he can do a competent job as the leader of the opposition in that role. He can fill that seat at that desk. Can he win an election? Almost certainly not. If you look at that Taxpayers Union poll, his negatives are almost as bad as Collins's. Not quite, but they're bad. The yak renaissance is very much a sort of online phenomenon. And Christopher Luxon, well, very untried. Chris Bishop or Nicola Willis, I mean, absolutely no way. I don't think that any of them could carry 50% of the caucus vote. Because when you look at that caucus, and it's been bolstered, by the execution of Nick Smith and his replacement with Harati Hepango, who is a loyalist of Collins. People like Maureen Pugh, who we discovered in the New Zealand Herald this week has been struck by lightning 3 times.
Amazing.
Which we'll just leave that there and proceed with the political analysis. But,
that should instantly qualify her to be the spokesperson for energy, shouldn't it?
What was the?
We'll just plug her into the national grid, I reckon.
What was the quote she said? I'll never forget the smell of my own burning flesh, which, to be honest, could be a quote from any member of the National Caucus,
or
right
a quote
now.
from when she read the media after Simon Bridges' chat logs were leaked.
Oh my! What did he say? He was like,
I think he said she was fucking useless, didn't she?
Yeah, he was. He was like, she just sits there saying nothing with paper clips and staplers being slowly drawn across
paper
the
clips. That's the trouble. There you go. You've got it right there. Very conductive materials.
I do wonder too, you know, if you're like a newbie MP or some sort of backbencher and there's people there trying to crunch the numbers, given how ruthlessly people have been humiliated and or dispatched of, you know, would you really be willing to throw your chips in and try and roll her, knowing that you could be smelling your own burning flesh?
Yeah. Are you going to throw your paperclip into the ring when there is a massive fucking storm raging around the room? That's right. And I don't know. I mean, I guess that's why the speculation lands on Simon Bridges. And I mean, I guess the idea is, oh, well, he's willing to give it a go because what's he got to lose? And his star has risen since. And the people who might fancy the job later would be like, oh, he's a caretaker manager. And he might be, well, I'll give it a go as a caretaker manager and let's see. You know, I'm now a universally beloved figure with my very readable memoir, which has been loved by everyone except Annabelle, Lee Mather and Ben Thomas, who were very rudely left off the free copy list. I don't know. Like, is that how it works, Ben? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, look, you know, that would be the sort of thinking, and look, it's not impossible. You know, Bridges, for all of, you know, his personal negatives in a statistical sense, prior to COVID was on track to quite possibly win the election at the beginning of 2020. And, you know, one interesting, you know, there was also that UMR poll that was released, which showed that the government had not gotten a huge bounce out of this lockdown, that it was that Labour was still sort of around 45, 46. The Greens were on about 6 or 7. And, you know, it is possible that actually a couple more lockdowns, you know, if vaccination rates have been slowing, most other developed countries have plateaued, you know, sort of around 65, 70%, that wouldn't be enough for us to reopen under our current plan. There are all sorts of things that, you know, touch wood, won't go wrong, but could go wrong in New Zealand national life, which could present, you know, a very different landscape, you know, come election time. Now, that's not something that Simon Bridges can control. It's not something that Judith Collins can control. It's not something that the National Caucus can control. What the National Caucus can possibly control is how pleasant their lives are in the 2 years leading up to that.
Right, but also there's a very base calculation, and we saw this a lot with the Labour Party in opposition, which is if you're an elected member of Parliament, your job security is contingent on getting either enough votes to win your electorate or enough votes to get you in at your particular place on the list. And that's always been the rule in Westminster systems and democracies generally, right? And at a certain point, you look at those numbers and you go, 21.3%. The rest of it is secondary, tertiary to that consideration. And at the point at which you go, couldn't do worse than this, because 21.3% means it's not exactly a massive caucus at the moment, but it means quite a few people lose their jobs.
But they might also be considering, you know, like the Jacinda effect, who, you know, came in at the last minute. And was it 2017?
Well,
so long ago, I can't even remember. And be thinking maybe we should just sit tight and then, you know, throw our chip, you know, not get publicly humiliated and then raked over the coals for the next 2 years hold till the last minute and then throw down.
Absolutely right. And, well, look, put it this way. I mean, I opened that piece when writing about Judith Collins the other day, talking about that, you know, the cliche of the leader of the opposition being the toughest job in politics, blah, blah, blah. But when you think about it, who was the last leader of the opposition to become Prime Minister who'd been leader of the opposition for longer than 7 weeks? It was John Key.
It was John Key, yeah. And he was
that's dialing back a bit, right?
And he was he was 2 years.
The internet had just been invented.
Opposition leaders certainly don't get to lose 2 elections in a row in the 21st century.
I think Helen Clark was the last one, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Not in the internet age either, eh?
No.
Internet 24-hour news cycles.
You know, I have some sympathy for Collins. I have some sympathy for Muller. I have some sympathy for all of those Labour leaders, the Shearers, the Goffs, the Cunliffes, whatever. It's so easy for us to sit here and go, you know, the other cliche is stop barking at every car. Well, Judith Collins didn't sit down at any of those interviews and go, what I want to do now is have a go at Susie Wiles, or what I want to do now is have a go at blah, blah, blah. She just couldn't resist. It's a kind of discipline, you know? And yeah, I don't know. It is pretty tricky. It is a pretty tricky job to be the leader of the opposition. And I do think probably if you're sitting in the National Caucus now, you're thinking the best way to go in is come down like a skateboard ramp unnoticed with 6 weeks to go. And then the stories to be, oh my God, they're changing all the signs. And I'm, you know, although to be fair, that's what Judith Collins did. So maybe that isn't the best example after all. Are we done? Is there anything to add?
We're done. I'm so tired.
That was a long podcast.
Was it?
Our sharp 30 minutes ended up being 55 minutes.
It's true.
Can you edit 25 minutes out of it, Tiahi?
Yeah.
Wow. Is there anything it could do without?
I'll just get rid of all of the stuff about Judith Collins and we'll be sweet.
Yeah,
that's it.
Wow. Could you just take a limb off Michelangelo's David? Could you just does the Mona Lisa need both ears?
You can't see this because this is an audio product, ladies and gentlemen, but Ben Thomas is lifting a celery stick to his lips now and coating it in refried beans and chomping down on it. It's good.
It's good.
Rate that out of 5.
What's the kind of scale? Like, is dinner at my favorite restaurant a 5, or is like a particularly good celery stick with really nice refried beans a 5?
Sounds like it's a 5.
It's pretty good.
I think you've said it there.
Far.
E whanga whetu.
Look at that. Ka nui te mihi, kia koutou I whakarongo mai ki a Gone By Lunchtime. Noho ora mai la.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at the Spinoff. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spinoff member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spinoff Podcast Network.